Hi, Julian here from PopcornFX. In this video we are going to see how to replace the snowdrop effect of this UE4 scene by a snow effect made in PopcornFX and how it will improve the old effect. So right now there is a very low density of snowdrops. I'm not even sure you'll be able to see them in this video. Yeah, we can see some very small drops, small snowflakes falling, so very light snow. And actually, if I take a look at all the snow particle effects in this level, you will see that they are actually placed along the path that the player is supposed to or expected to follow, all along the map. And if I go, let's say, in here, I can also hardly see anything. However, if I open one of those effects, you'll see that they're GPU sprites and they will be capped at 1,000,000 particles, and this is a really massive amount. You can get a feel of it here if I show them as wireframe. Also, there seems to be some weird bugs with that cascade effect. Some parts of it will just pop out and disappear for no apparent reason. Well, I'm not an expert with cascade, so there might be a very good explanation for that, but it's still pretty weird. Anyway, massive amount of particles. The spawn region is extremely large as well. It will spawn in a big square above the player, but still, even though there's a massive amount of them, we can hardly see anything here. Oh, actually, I'm not seeing any of them here anymore. So the reason for that is most likely because there are multiple instances of these effects. Each one of them will spawn up to 1,000,000 particle, and the most likely thing that's happening here is that another instance somewhere is spawning particles, but the maximum number of particles get reached and they just stop spawning when that limit is reached. Well, there is definitely something weird here because I'm not seeing any snowdrops at all. Oh, here they are. Right. Okay, I see it. I see some of them here. But you'll see that after a while they will just stop for a moment, stop falling, then they'll start falling again. Yeah, so here for example we don't have any new ones anymore, only those falling here. And nothing else up there. So if I delete all those other, or again, if I delete all those other effects and only keep that one, now you can see all of them. So it's definitely something like a global cap on the number of particles. So for this level we could probably get away with just having a single instance of that effect because it spawns in such a large area. But anyway, this is a pretty nasty way to set up snow because the density is still very small, and we have right now, I don't know how many, but a lot. Right, we're at 500,000 right now. 500,000 particles for such a low perceived density of snow, 600,000, and this will keep rising till it reaches 1,000,000 particles. Anyway, we are going to replace all that by a new snow effect that we're going to build from our dust motes effect from the previous videos. So back to PopcornFX here. The first thing I'm going to do, because I'm going to clone that dust motes effect, the first thing I'm going to do is to move all those helper templates that wrap the particles around the camera, to move them inside a helper file that I will be able to reuse across different effects. Because here, when I duplicate the effect, I duplicate those templates, and whenever I want to change them or improve them or fix an issue inside, I will have to do it for every single effect I cloned from this original effect. So I want to share them inside a single file. So here I am going to create a new empty effect that I'll name environment templates. So empty effect. The sole purpose of this effect will be to store the common templates in there, the common graphs. Also note that usually we recommend that you create your templates inside the library directory. Here in library we have the PopcornFX core directory that contains all the base templates we provide with the PopcornFX editor, but if you have a production ongoing on or you plan to share your templates between different projects, a good thing to do is to create your own folder in there and to have all your public templates in that folder rather than having them a bit everywhere. Here, for simplicity, I'm just creating it right here directly inside the VFX folder, but if you have a larger project, you'd probably want to use the library folder instead. So if I open my dust motes effect again and right click on those templates, I can pick move to file, select the new environment templates effect and pick move, and now it will tell me that this template is not public but used inside this effect, so moving it will require to make it public, and it asks me if I want to make it public or not. If I choose no, it will break this effect, so I choose yes. I will do the same with the wrap around camera. I will move it there, and you will note that the view box coordinates, as it was used by both the templates I just moved, now when moving the last one, because it's not used anymore inside the effect, it will also move it in the target file. So here I'm left with only the templates that I'm using inside this effect. Right, so I'm going to save that, and you will notice when I go back to the content browser sorry, that here it displays the dust motes effect with an error saying that there is an unresolved template. That's because this file here isn't yet saved. That's why you see the little star here. So you will either have to open it and do Ctrl S, or to do file save all assets. It will save it, and here to get rid of that error, because saving the template file won't automatically reanalyze all the effects that might have used it. So to get rid of that error, you can either click and do reindex assets if you have developer mode enabled here, or you can simply open it, hit Ctrl S. This will force the rescan of the asset and the errors will be gone. This isn't an ideal behavior, of course. Ideally, we want you to not have to worry about that and to have everything working even if the files aren't saved on disk. But this is a limitation of the current system. It's simply not implemented yet. In the future, we hope to have this working properly with unsaved files, so you won't have to worry about that. So now I can clone that, and I will name it Simple Snow. Right. So first thing, to make this look like snow, I'm going to change the initial parameters of the physics node. I want the snow to fall down, I want it to be affected by wind, and I want a small turbulence. So I will remove the initial random velocity. And here, if I set the wind property to a negative value, you will see that it doesn't change anything because I have no drag. For particles to be affected by wind, I must have a non-zero drag. So here I'll set the drag to 1. Make sure to check out the simple rain video where I go into more details about why you actually want to use wind and drag for this instead of the first instinct, which would be using acceleration. This has to do with the fact that most of these falling things, rain, snow, etc., when you see them at ground level, they're actually at terminal velocity and they are not currently being accelerated. So it's a better way to simulate it, to use wind and drag. And now you see that the particles fall down, they actually accelerate until they reach the wind value. And the higher the drag, the faster they accelerate to that value. So if they start faster, they will decelerate to match the wind velocity. But here if I reset, you'll see that they all start with a zero velocity. That's because velocity is 0, and they take some time to accelerate to the wind velocity. So instead, I will provide the wind as a float 3 that I'll then be able to also wire inside the initial velocity. This way, when the effect starts, the particles already have the correct velocity. So I will twig that because I find it to fall a little too fast. Yep, 0.3 seems nice. But now they all fall in a straight line. And snow usually doesn't fall in a straight line, has some small turbulence. The snowdrops fall in slightly different directions. And there's a very easy way to do that. Here I can expose the vector field pin. Here it was already visible, but by default I believe it's not. Yeah, it's not visible by default. So here you can just enable it by clicking the little eye icon there. So I will drag a wire out and drop a turbulence node. And as soon as I drop the turbulence node, you will see that the particles start following a more random pattern. I can set a time scale to the turbulence so that the patterns change over time. And here this is a bit too strong, so I'll reduce the strength. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that, so I will save the effect. And I will bring it into Unreal. Simple snow. Right, and drop that in my scene. So now I have my simple snow, and it's actually all over the entire level. And this is actually achieved by wrapping the particles in a view-centered cube. Make sure to check out the dust mote videos to see how it's made. So before improving the rendering of those snowdrops, currently it's a simple dot texture that looks pretty ugly here when I look up the sky. So before improving the rendering, I'm actually going to expose a bunch of things here, more controls in the effect interface so that I can control them directly inside Unreal. For example, I might want to have some side wind, or I might want to change the strength of the turbulence to have more chaotic wind turbulences or less chaotic ones. So I will first take this node, the wind node, and right click, expose as attribute, and we'll name it wind, and it will appear here. And now to control the scale of the turbulence, you will see that this value here doesn't have an eye icon. That's simply because all these are static properties of a resource node. So this turbulence node is a resource node. Make sure to check out the vector fields video for more details about these controls. But you have a way to change the strength of the turbulence by selecting the physics node and exposing this vector field scale pin, and it will do the same thing as if you were scaling this directly. So I'll restore that to the default, and I will wire a 0.5 in there. And now with this node I can also export it as attribute, and I will name it turbulence strength. Alright, I will set a minimum value of 0, and I won't set a max, but I will make it a slider for easier tweaking, and I'll set the max of the slider to let's say 2. Just a bit arbitrary, completely arbitrary. Yeah, seems fine. All right. Quick note here about the PopcornFX editor and UE4 running both at the same time. When you unfocus the Unreal Engine editor, the rendering and the updates stop. But by default, when you unfocus the Popcorn editor, the updates will keep running. You have a setting for that in the editor preferences, all editors. Here you have the CPU saving mode setting, which defaults to window minimized, so it will only stop the updates and the rendering when you minimize the window. But you can set it to application focus lost or window focus lost. I tend to prefer application focus lost because window focus lost will also pause the updates when you have two PopcornFX editor windows next to each other, and it's often useful to have both simulations running at the same time. For example, when you're tweaking a template and you want to see how it changes the effect running in the second window. So here, whenever the PopcornFX editor loses focus, so when I focus the Unreal editor, it will stop the updates so that UE4 runs better. Right, so this is saved. I can go back to Unreal, hit re-import, and now I have all those controls there. I can give it some side wind. So here actually here you'll see that it's not instant. Again, that's a question of spawn or evolve, so I will move that wind to evaluate at evolve time. But if I do that, because it's wired in the velocity, it will override each frame the velocity and it will break the effect. So let's try it. And here you can see that it has completely removed my turbulence. This is because every frame the velocity of the particles is reset to the wind, because here I told it to evaluate at evolve. So very simple. To change that, I'll just duplicate the wind node, make it run at spawn, and wire that in the velocity. So now the velocity is initialized at spawn time with the wind, and every frame the wind sent to the physics is changing based on whatever I'm setting here. So if I set 1 in X, you can see all the particles being blown away at the same time, and that's what I want. We can do the same thing with the turbulence strength actually. I'll set that to evolve as well. just so that changing it in Unreal is more snappy. Right. So now when I change the wind, it blows all the particles at the same time. And one last thing I'm going to expose is the world radius used for wrapping the particles around the camera. This is set to 3 currently, and I might want to change that in UE4 to get a larger view distance. So I will also export it as an attribute. Same thing here, if you force that to evolve, you will need to duplicate it so it doesn't force the spawn around camera logic to evolve. Here I want to keep it at spawn, it makes things easier. Right. So now let's go to the rendering side of things. So first I'm going to change the texture because that dot is ugly. So here I should have a flames texture. Doesn't really matter, it will be fine for snowflakes as well. So here I have a 4x4 texture atlas. You can see it here in the viewport. My blending mode is set to alpha blend, and here to use that as an atlas I will have to check the atlas property of the billboard renderer, leave it to procedural. You can say you can tell the billboard renderer to use an external file that defines the corners of each of your atlas styles. Here it's just a regular grid, so we can just be procedural and say it's a 4x4 atlas. And now you will see in the viewport that instead of that tiling texture, I now have the first item there, the first subtexture. And when enabling the atlas feature, there is also the texture ID pin that popped here, and whenever I change the texture ID, you will see in the viewport the textures that are changing. So let me make this slightly bigger so we see better. So here, as I change the texture ID, it cycles inside each of the sub UVs. So I want a random sub UV here, so I will just use a rand node between 0 and the number of atlas tiles I have in my atlas. So this is 4x4, so I have 16 tiles, so I'll do a rand between 0 and 16. Not between 0 and 15. A rand between 0 and 16 gives me actually values between 0 and 15 when converted to integer. So the largest value that the random will produce, as it's a floating point random, will be 15.99999. It will never return exactly 16. It will, that range here is basically the minimum value included and the maximum value excluded. So if you do a rand between 0 and 1, it can return exactly 0, but it can't return exactly 1. It will always return at most 0.99999. So now we have random sub UVs for those snowflakes. I will also expose the size as an attribute, so I have full control over what it looks like inside Unreal. Save that. Re-import. And now you can see the different textures. So there is one last thing that I mentioned in the last dust modes tutorial. You can see that when I move, the snowdrops here are going darker. So this is due to the way that I'm fading the color. Here I'm just multiplying the color by the fade, so it will multiply the alpha, but it will also multiply the RGB and therefore make the snowflakes darker. So I don't want to do that. Instead I want to use a color node where I wire in the initial color, and in that color node I will expose the alpha scale pin and wire my fader in the alpha scale, so it scales only the alpha, and use that as my color. And when I do that and re-import, here you will see that the dark artifacts are gone and my snow is behaving as expected. And I now have infinite an infinite snow field over that forest scene at a fraction of the cost of the massive 1 million particles and a much higher perceived density. So that's pretty cool. Now there's one little thing to be aware of when you're working with camera centered effects. If I go to play here, the snow disappears, and that's not actually a bug. It's because here I was using the simulate play mode, and the simulate play mode will not update the camera coordinates. It will actually use another camera, and if I go back to the player start location, here you can see I have that cube of snow right there, which is around the place that I would normally spawn in the level. And so here, if I change the play mode to selected viewport and play, now I have the expected behavior where the camera aligned, the camera centered effects properly follow my viewport. So that's it for this video. I hope it was useful. Stay tuned for the next ones, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment in the comment section. Thanks for watching.